what is success to you? Like we talk about entrepreneurial excellence, and excellence has its own definitions, but what is excellent and what is success in general to you, maybe philosophically, certainly business wise? What does that mean? There's a lot of different answers for success.
Could you see yourself working for that person?
Yeah.
So when I'm hiring, I'm always trying to be the dumbest person in the room. So I want to be dumber than all my co-founders and all my hires. Like, I'm hiring them so they can tell me what to do.
Yep.
And that heuristic alone, I think, is really powerful and simple, and can go a long way.
So almost saying, like, am I learning from this person in different things? And that presumably can come from anywhere, right? It's not just because if you're interviewing someone junior, you should still feel that way about them, right? Hey, I can learn something from this person. They're bringing something special and new to the table.
Yeah, I think certainly the companies you just talked about, whether it be like Elon and Tesla or Facebook, you're certainly going to hear about those companies because they are among the most successful and they are personalities. But like, take Google, for example. The founders aren't really there anymore, and I guess they were in the limelight, but the company is still arguably one of, if not the most successful companies ever. That's just a cash flowing machine.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. It's great to have Dan Reich share with me on the call today. Discussion. Dan, I find fascinating for a bunch of reasons. We got to know each other recently, and I already find him to be someone who I can ask questions to about my own business and learn about what I should be doing better and how I can improve. Part of that's because Dan is a more than just a multi-time founder. I believe Dan has founded almost 25 different companies in his life and career, which he's a pretty young guy. So that is a lot of different companies, and we definitely want to understand what that looks like. But beyond the 25, and of course, a large majority of those have failed, he's also founded two companies that had successful exits as the co-founder of Tula, which sold to Procter & Gamble, and the co-founder of Troops, which sold to Salesforce, and also currently the co-founder of Dibs. He's done a lot of different companies and had a lot of real success, and obviously, as usual, putting success in quotes, because Dan, I want to learn more from you about what success really looks like. But Dan, thank you so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's psyched to be here.
Good. So sort of maybe to kick it off, walk me through what is success to you? Like we talk about entrepreneurial excellence, and excellence has its own definitions, but what is excellent and what is success in general to you, maybe philosophically, certainly business wise? What does that mean? There's a lot of different answers for success.
Yeah. I think success for me is a realization that life is short and we have to make the most out of this short time and gift we have here on this little planet called Earth. And so I think what success is not a measure of purely how much money you make or what your title is. And I think often people make the mistake of just getting on the societal treadmill of like going to school, getting good grades, going to better school, getting good grades, getting a job, getting a promotion, getting a house, getting a mortgage, et cetera. And then you fast forward and you're like 60, 70 years old and you look back in life and you're like, what happened? Like coulda, woulda, shoulda, didn't. And so for me, success is making sure that you're just optimizing in life for things that are engaging and make you happy and are fun. The way I go about doing that is by working on fun and interesting ideas that happen to be businesses and doing so with companies. One of the ways that I think articulates what success is really well is what Jeff Bezos refers to as the regret minimization framework, which is imagine you're 80 or 90 years old and you look back in life and you want to optimize. You ideally have optimized for life with as little regret as possible. And I think if you do that, you are wildly successful throughout life. And so for me, why I love building companies is much for the same reason why I loved playing Legos when I was little, or why I like playing video games or still play video games, because it's just fun and interesting and engaging. And that is what company building is for me. It's just like a giant thought exercise and giant game, which if you play right and well and with the right people, you'll have fun and you can win. And it just so happens that winning at this sport or this game means, yeah, you can also make a bunch of money at the end of the road. But for me, that's how I think about success in a professional, somewhat of a personal sense.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. It's something I I generally agree with that thesis as well. And I don't want to look back when I'm closer to the end of my life and saying, oh my God, what did I miss out on? And I ask myself that on a regular basis, that exact question. And am I happy doing what I'm doing? And the constant answer that I keep coming back to is yes, I really enjoy it. And yeah, working hard is fun for me because it's constantly pushing me to improve. And so I agree with that in a big way. When you think through the scorecard of entrepreneurial success, which tends to be money, how do you look at that, right? What do you think is that it, but is that the motivating drive for you, or is that just the outcome? And how do you measure that to some extent? Because there's always more money. There's always somebody who's going to be made $1 billion instead of 100 million or 10. And like, where is that judgment line to equal sort of success, or how do you look at that part? Because you've had a bunch of success, I think I would define it as. But how do you
Yeah.
define it?
Yeah. For me, it's twofold. It's measured based on the impact you're making on the world and the impact you're making in the lives of other people that you care about. So, for example, there have been a bunch of people that I've worked with over my career, many of which have gone on to become their own founders and start their own companies as a result of my interactions with them. To me, that's incredibly rewarding to think about, whether it be people starting their own companies or getting a huge boost in their career professionally. In a bunch of those instances where I know for a fact that I've had a role to play there, to me, that's incredibly rewarding. It's also incredibly rewarding when you can do that at a very personal level in the lives of your customers or consumers. So I think back, for example, both with actually Tula and Troops. Let's start with Tula. Tula, I remember pretty vividly in the earliest days, we got customer letters. One in particular, the letter and the gist of the letter was a woman that told us she had Crohn's disease and for 2 years was debilitated and could not leave her house. And it was only after she began to use our products did she feel beautiful and confident. And for the first time in 2 years, was able to leave her house. And I remember reading that letter, honestly tearing up a little bit, thinking, this is incredible. What a difference they're making on people's lives at scale. So that was really, really motivating. In the case of Troops is a very different example in the software world. The thesis there was people spend ungodly amounts of time at work. Probably a third of your life is working, a third is sleeping, and a third is probably watching TV. But we felt like the third at work shouldn't be as painful and dreadful, and especially shouldn't be as painful when you have to interact with all these tools. So we thought, what if we can make people's lives better at work? What a lift for society that would be, both in terms of engagement and productivity and happiness. And so we would similarly get feedback from customers that were, in essence, things like, you've completely changed my life at work, how we do our job. It's so much easier, much more efficient, et cetera. And like, how amazing is that when you think about doing that at scale, considering people spend over a third of their lives easily at work? It's amazing. So even back to my earlier comment, I think if you're optimizing for fun and engagement and happiness, both personally and for your customers, surely it's only a matter of time, with a lot of luck as well plays a role, that you'll get to a pretty good outcome.
And how do you how do you decide then what areas to focus on as a company, right? So you just gave two examples that were in wildly different industries. How do you think through and you've done 25 companies. So how do you think through which one to really double down on, build out? How do you, most people say, okay, you get an industry, you're in the skincare, health and beauty industry. Why would you ever, how do you even have the skills to go build a software company in sort of workplace optimization? How do you think through those games? Or maybe it's irrelevant because a company is a company to company, and you just need to build a delightful product that people love, and it's less about your knowledge of that industry.
Yeah. So first thing I'll note is, of those 25, most of them by far did not work. So I learned the hard way on what building an unsuccessful company looks like, which has certainly informed what a successful company looks like. Probably, and this will lead into your question, but like the first And luckily, most important lesson I learned in business was my first real company. It was in high school. I was building an e-commerce site that would sell wholesale urban apparel D2C online. This is like 2000. And so think products and companies like Rockaware or Apple Bottom Jeans or Sean John. So people could come to my site and they could buy those brands wholesale. And I had a partner, I use that word loosely, a partner that was doing all of my drop shipping and fulfillment. And I was doing all of the e-commerce work, built the website, would manage customer orders, would do all the advertising. And so I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd run Yahoo ads and Google ads. I'd go to school. While I was at school, my customer service rep would take the orders, fulfill them, deal with customer service issues. And by customer service rep, I mean my mom. Like I literally bought her a computer, got a physical credit card processing machine because there were no payment gateways. She'd like literally take the credit card number and swipe it. And then I'd come home and I'd reconcile the payments, the ads, et cetera. And I would do that, rinse and repeat. Long story short, the partner that I was using was selling fake goods, damaged goods. It was basically a fraud. And I kind of got a hint at that because I would get death threats. I literally got one, like a death threat from a customer that said, like, we know where you live with specificity. And if you don't do right by us, we're going to come after you. Scare the hell out of me. I shut the company down. And that was really my first lesson in how important it is to get the people right. And so the thing all these companies have in common, in fact, the word company is Latin for I might butcher this, but like a company to break bread with other people. That is what a company is. It's just a collection of people. So what all these companies have in common is they are a collection of people working together to solve a problem or make a great product or service for their customers. And so for me, that is the most important piece of building a company. And it doesn't matter if it's in beauty or software, finance, you name it. It's getting amazingly talented, motivated people in the same room with complementary skill sets, the same way you think about building a world-class or championship basketball team. The same is true in business. And on one hand, it can be an advantage if you're operating in a domain that you have experience in because you have experience in it, you know what to look for, you know what to avoid. On the other hand, actually, that can be a detriment because you become a bit jaded and biased to the way things should be and should not be. A quote I think about a lot that I'm also going to butcher. The founder of Southwest Airlines has a quote, something to the effect of, he was the best person to start an airline because he never worked at one before. Yep. And so by not having expertise in an industry, you get to approach it with a beginner's mind and fresh eyes. So both can work. I think the thing that is common for me, or the thing that I look for when building a company is there a great market that's worth running at that's sufficiently large enough? Because it takes just as much work to start a small company or a successful company in a small market as it does to start a successful company in a big market. So you want to make sure you're in a big and growing market. You want to make sure you're working with amazing people, like pretty obvious, but without that, you're dead. And then you want to make sure you have an amazing and differentiated product, which also sounds easy and obvious, but it's really hard to make, especially in today's world, a really amazing and differentiated product. And so I think if you can get all of those three things, great race, the market, great horse, the product, and great jockey, the founding team or team, you can do anything. And it's cheesy to say, but that's true. So those are the things I think about when building a company. And obviously it's not limited to any one domain. It could be any domain as long as it satisfies those pieces.
So then why don't we break down some of those, right? So what are the key things you try to do first and foremost when you're starting a company? So, okay, let's pretend you've identified a great industry. Okay, so that's out of the way. You've identified a great industry to go after. Do you first then go build that team, or do you first sketch out the product? What are the things you first do to achieve what you hope will be a great outcome?
Every company and situation is a snowflake. They're all different. Those three ingredients all need to be true, but which comes first or which I focus on first is completely circumstantial. So for example, when I started Tula, the truth is I had a company years ago, two buddies from college that we started. It was called Spinback. We help online brands and retailers measure how much money we made from Facebook. Our customers were companies like L'Oreal, Godiva Chocolate, L'Occitane, QVC. After we exited that business to a company called Buddy Media, which we then sold to Salesforce, I spent about a year and a half wandering the desert, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, working out of a family office in New York City. And I finally, after a year, came up with a new SaaS idea that was effectively my last company 2.0 version. I felt like there was more to be done. We sold too early and there was just still a lot of white space. So I reconnected with all of my old customers, one of them being QVC. And in that meeting, after I pitched them and successfully got them on board with my new company as a design partner, they pitched me something. And what they pitched me was the following. They're like, Dan, we realize that media is changing. Traditional media, television, radio, print is dying, and it's migrating to digital media, the internet, social media. And we are a TV company with finite shelf space limited to 364 days a year, 24/7 minus Christmas. We want to prove we can launch brands digitally, but we don't know how. Can you help? And oh, by the way, beauty is the fastest growing category. So here I was thinking, and I shared this with them. I'm like, I know your business pretty well. I know digital pretty well, but I don't know anything about beauty. But in that instance, I remember thinking, okay, I think I maybe checked the big box, which is huge market with the third largest retailer in the world doing 10 billion a year in sales, asking for my help, who were also telling me this needs to be successful. So I've got the market, but like I don't have a product, I don't have credibility. I don't know what I'm doing in the beauty space, but I know someone that does. And so when I came back to the office, there was another person doing his own investing. And the reason he was able to do his own private equity investing is he started and sold a company called Bobbi Brown Cosmetics.
Well, no,
he's the beauty guy, right? So here I am. I'm like, all right, I've got, market and distribution check. I've become really close with this beauty expert, and I had heard his backstory and the early war days of how Bobbi Brown got started. Okay, beauty check. I think we could address at least part of the team. The problem is, so we've got the market, we've got kind of maybe product, it's beauty-ish, but like we need more. We need to be specific on what the product is and round out the team. And so we knew we needed a third person to help us. And that's when we went on a search for what eventually became our third partner, Dr. Raj, who helped us kind of hone in on what we would make, which is a line of skincare products using probiotics and superfoods. At a time, the American Academy of Dermatology came out and said probiotics are a beauty breakthrough. But at the time, the American Academy of Dermatology came out and said probiotics are a beauty breakthrough, and we got really excited about it. And then Tula was born. So I share that because in that example, the sequence started with market and then team and product. With Troops, my partners and I knew that what I was getting at earlier, you have all these salespeople and biz dev people at work that have to do their job, doing prospecting, cold calls, sales, and then managing that information on customers, revenue, pipeline, and et cetera, was just such a pain in the ass. Having used a bunch of fields, forms, buttons, and boxes in these legacy, old school enterprise software systems that we refer to the category of CRM. We know Salesforce would be the leader, but it's like mission critical. So the thought exercise there was at a time when this most used, I think it was the top 6 most used apps in the world were messaging apps. We're like, wait a minute, what if you could interact with all of your enterprise software and mission critical workflow much in the same way you text with your mom or buddy? What if you could interact with things like Salesforce over a messaging interface? That was the insight and thesis for Troops. And I share that because that started with a product insight, or product intuition. And also started with my other partner, Scott, who also came into that domain. So started with a person, the team, who together we kind of honed in on the product. And we knew obviously that the market was sufficiently large and growing in the SaaS ecosystem. But, look, that's another example where the sequencing of those things were wildly different, but we still checked all of those boxes. So for me, it's just knowing you need to check them, and less important with what you start with, so long as you're checking them all.
How do you know you're getting the right people on a team? So you mentioned Scott and you mentioned Dr. Raj. How did you know that they were people you could work with? Because I get this question a lot from founders. They're like, hey, I need a co-founder, or I need some early team members. How do I find this person? How do I determine if they're the right fit? And I'm sure, and I ask this for 2 reasons. One is, how do you find that person? But presumably you had great relationships with those folks and it worked out well, because I'm sure you've also seen lots of startups that fail because the co-founders have a breakup, and that's one of the leading causes to failed companies. So people get this wrong all the time. How did you get it right? Or what do you think you did to make sure you got it right? Or presumably you did get it right. Maybe you didn't, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is the most important aspect of building a company, because your job as a CEO, there are many jobs, but really it's like cash, culture, vision, hiring. You want to make sure you have the resources to hire the best and amazing people, to point them in the right direction and build a culture that gets you there. But again, back to what the literal definition of the word company means, companies are nothing without its people. So, as I mentioned earlier, fortunately and through luck, I learned that lesson really early. So, early on, I became really in tune with trying to figure out what made for a great partner, or maybe more importantly, what made for a bad partner. What makes for a great partner, in my opinion, is somebody that complements you both in terms of skill and in terms of demeanor as well. So, an approach rather. So, I think a good example would be my partner, Ken, who I built Troops with, and Tula and Dibs and a few other things. As an example, so relatively speaking, I'm young, he's older. My background's engineering, his background's finance. I come from technology, he comes from beauty. I'm generally very aggressive and risk on. He's generally more conservative and risk off. I'm much more big picture, although I can do the details. I don't like them as much. He's much more in the weeds and detail oriented and not as big picture, but I think you get the point, which is complementary in multiple dimensions. And for that reason, we still work together on a much handful of different companies because it just works so well. I think cases when things don't go well, or maybe you've got two very overlapping skill sets, so there's a bit of friction because now you both are kind of doing the same job, or very overlapping personalities. Maybe you get two type A kind of egotistical personalities that both want to be in the limelight, which is also a bit of an issue. And then the list goes on. So for me, it's about finding as many complementary dimensions as possible. And more importantly, finding people that are just fun, awesome humans that you're kind of pumped to get up in the morning, go to work with every day. That's by far the most important, because then work goes from being not a job, but to something enjoyable that you look forward to. And it becomes a journey. The journey becomes the prize with those people. And if you have fun and are engaged with the people you're working with, and it doesn't feel like work, it feels like play, that's the point at which you will be the most successful, because you just want to do that thing. You want to be the best because it's fun and engaging. And if you're working with shitty people, that's just never going to happen, because you're like dreading to go to work. You don't want to go to the office. You don't want to have that conversation with that person or send them that note or read anything they're doing. So I look for, are they amazing people and are they complementary?
how do you judge that? I mean, because look, every founder, at least I think every founder generally comes from a somewhat optimistic background. You almost have to be to decide you're going to start something crazy as a company that hasn't existed before. So it's easy to convince yourself that I've met this co-founder who has all the right qualifications and we really are having fun when things are easy, right? It's early days. You haven't actually had anything hard to do, like raise money even, or it's just early. How do you really dig in though to figuring out, do we have that fun relationship? And I ask this not only from your perspective as an entrepreneur and founder, but also, and we haven't talked about this, but you're also an investor. So you're judging people relatively on a snap judgment basis, or you're not diving into people's relationships. How do you look at and judge other people's co-founder relationships, and or how would you recommend people really dive deep on their own ones to get that right?
So there's two ways. The first is through the interview itself. And I have a set of interview questions that I'm happy to share that I touch on to try to gauge who this person is. That maybe gets you 5 or 10% of the way there. I think it's impossible truly to really know a person in a 30-minute or an hour call. Like, it's literally impossible. The second way, the more important way, is you just do references. You have conversations with other people that have worked with them for years. Those people will really know more about that person and how good they are or not. And in both cases, the thing I'm really looking for is does this person demonstrate some exceptional ability in their life? Like I think about people in a professional setting almost in a T shape, whereas you want somebody that's an amazing general athlete, but also exceptional in a domain or two, more than the more the better. And so that's the thing I'm screening for. And again, the way you get there quickest and most accurately is with references. The questions that I ask or like to ask on an interview, there's a few, but one question is, what is your greatest superpower? What is your superhuman strength? I'm trying to get a sense of just quickly, can they tell me what they're exceptional at? You'll know pretty quickly if it's true or not. I ask questions like, I'll ask, who are you working for, or who's your boss right now? I'll ask for that person's name. So they might tell me their name is Adam. And I'll say, okay, when I call Adam and I ask Adam on a scale of 1 to 10, how will you grade you? What will they say and why? And I'm looking for an honest answer, but I'm looking for emotional intelligence, self-awareness. People that tell me they're a 10, I wonder, like, are they really the best? And is there an ego at play? People that tell me that like they're 6 or 7, like maybe have too much self-doubt or aren't that good. 8 or 9 informs me that they're really great, but there's more that they can be better at. So they're a bit humble in that sense. I'll ask questions like, maybe my favorite, at least when I've been told is a favorite, is what's the greatest misconception that people have about you? That was one that one of my friends and investors, Wiley, shared with me. And that question is amazing because when you ask it, you see people kind of squirm a little bit because they're beginning to tell you their darkest fears and secrets that they feel about themselves, which is also insightful. And there's a handful others. But again, those are just good enough to give me a screen. Ultimately, I'll never really know that person without speaking to others that have worked with them for years. That's really where you get a true sense of how good they are.
And I assume this is, so we talked about that as being sort of more of a co-founder, senior person, but those questions apply across the board, or those things you do for every hire you make?
Every hire.
Yeah.
Every hire. Yeah. I mean, there becomes a point as a founder at which you can't be involved in every hiring decision. But if you instill that hiring practice, again, which is like ask really thorough questions to give you a true sense of who this person is, coupled with do the homework, you can set a culture where any person doing the hiring can embody those approaches. And if you do that, I think you're setting yourself up for scale. Another heuristic that I really like, this is a Mark Zuckerberg thing, but I think it's great, is simply heuristic of, could you see yourself working for that person?
Yeah.
So when I'm hiring, I'm always trying to be the dumbest person in the room. So I want to be dumber than all my co-founders and all my hires. Like, I'm hiring them so they can tell me what to do.
Yep.
And that heuristic alone, I think, is really powerful and simple, and can go a long way.
So almost saying like, am I learning from this person in different things? And that presumably can come from anywhere, right? It's not just because you're, hey, if you're interviewing someone junior, you should still feel that way about them, right? Hey, I can learn something from this person. They're bringing something special and new to the table.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And going back to the reference part, I want to kind of dive in there just for a second too, because I'm shocked by how many people don't do references. It's actually shockingly, I've worked with a lot of people in my career at this point, and I'm shocked by how few times I get calls from founders doing a reference check on someone. Maybe they're scared to call. Maybe they just don't want to hear what I have to say. Maybe the person they're interviewing is lying about the relationship that we have and doesn't want them to give a call, which certainly can be the case sometimes too. But it's a shock. I don't know. I don't know if you felt similarly, but I'm just shocked by that fact.
Yeah, look, it's more work, right? If I could do the interview in 30 minutes or an hour and feel excited, like, I feel great. This person seems great. They check out. Game on. Versus now you go pick up the phone and back channel and do 2, 3, 4 references times 30-minute calls or an hour call. You're talking another 2 to 4 hours easily. Like, yeah, people are lazy. And also sometimes people just feel the pressure that they need a hire, or they need to fill the role. Or if they're in a bigger corporate setting, like, less important to them to get it really, really right because, like, they're not the founder of a company. So Yeah, that's what I found. It ultimately just comes down to laziness and not wanting to do the work.
What I would argue, and this maybe goes to a wider point we should talk about, is sort of where to invest, how to think through investments of your time as an entrepreneur to lead to success. And what I mean by that, in using this example, yes, I agree with you. People are lazy and they don't want to put in the time to do a reference call. The problem that people don't consider is the cost of a failed hire is so much higher and greater than you spending. If you spend an extra 2 to 3 hours doing those reference checks and getting it really right, and that person then really works out for your company, that is so much more valuable than you saving an extra 2 hours, that person failing. So the long-term cost to you is so much greater. And so what maybe, and this is maybe part of what great entrepreneurs do, what is that level of like, hey, great entrepreneurs are thinking through the long-term consequences of decisions. Bad entrepreneurs are being short-term minded. Is that real? How do people think through where to spend their time, where to focus, and essentially where to invest?
Yeah, this is a mistake I made early. There's early on in your career, at least the way I felt about it anyway, it was like, if you work hard, you will succeed. There's such a thing as not only working hard, but working smart. And growing up, I like didn't give much credit to working smart, but I gave a ton of credit to working hard. Both matter a lot. But when, at least as I got older and became more experienced, what I realized and appreciated is that working smart and making good decisions and having good judgment and making sure that there's really strong alignment and strategic alignment for a company like is so critical, because if you don't have that, then you're kind of, everyone's rowing in the different directions. Stuart Butterfield, founder CEO of Slack, would talk about this all the time at Slack. And what he would talk about is this idea of, if people are working in two different vectors exactly opposed to one another, running 100 miles per hour to the right and 100 miles per hour to the left, you are literally going nowhere. And that happens all of the time in different flavors and vectors at companies, which is people are not working in perfect sync. And so if you can create that alignment, and the alignment can come through literal alignment and making sure people are working on the same thing, or making the right decisions on what to work on, or making the right hire and not the wrong hire, or taking another day or week or month to make the right hire, or to come up with a better roadmap, or make sure that the product prioritization is correct. Like, you buy yourself so much leverage in the organization than if you short circuit that and make the wrong hire, or get the product prioritization wrong, or insert any other number of things. So I think it comes back to leverage, good judgment, making smart decisions. And that sometimes comes with patience and realizing that you might be better off like not working today to go for a walk and just think, or maybe do that 2 days in a row. Because if you're not making those good judgments, then you might end up working really, really hard in the wrong direction. And that doesn't get you anywhere.
How do the best founders in your mind, and using yourself once again, I think as an example, because I think you're one of them, how do you make those judgments for yourself about when to take that extra time to think more deeply or more strategically, and take a break, versus I'm just going to push through and get it all done, and just go, I'm going to blast through Slack and email and those things. And what is that balance? Like, what is the balance that you found? And I'm guessing that balance has probably changed over the course of your career too, but like, how do you, what does that balance look like?
It's really hard, because it's like when you're in the forest, it's hard to see the forest through the trees. You're in the mud. And I'm really bad at this, because as someone that also works really hard, I would get, it's easy to get tunnel vision because you want to accomplish things and check off your to-do list. So one way I've thought about figuring that out is back to people, surrounding myself with great people, having a great board, having a great founding team, having a great executive team, so that if I am mired in the mud and things are going wrong, I have people around the table that will tell me,
Mm.
hey, this isn't the right decision. This isn't the right hire. We're going in the wrong direction. We should rethink A, B, and C. And hopefully I have those people that can hold that mirror up. And if they do, then we could have a conversation about it, and we could take the appropriate actions and time needed to figure it out. But without brutal honesty and that candid feedback, you're never going to, you're not going to know what's not working or what's wrong. And then you're not going to be able to recalibrate and fix things. And if you can't fix things, then you're just running off a cliff to death. And that is way worse than having the hard conversation with maybe your founder or board or executive team.
How do you make sure to get those people around you? So it sounds like part of it's recruiting to find those people. Part of it is just, I guess, I mean, and part of it is also like, are you promoting these people from within? Are you trying to staff your companies with senior people on a regular basis and bring outsiders in to do that? Is it board composition, or, boards for a lot of startups are mostly their investors in many, like their co-founder and their investors. And at least historically, a lot of that has been rubber stamping what founders want to do. I've actually seen too many companies fail where like the board did nothing. Shockingly, first time founder, $50 million, company fails. Where was the board? What were they doing? What does that look? I mean, once again, so more of the question about like internal hires, promoting them into more senior positions, or hiring externally for senior roles.
They can both work. They can absolutely both work. I think it's just circumstantial and it depends on the person, the role, the opportunity. And I've seen it where you promote within and the person just shoots the lights out and they're incredible. And I've seen instances where you pull someone in from the outside and they're also equally incredible. I think about Tula. We brought in, as the company was a bit more mature, maybe 4 years into the business, give or take, we brought in, if you count me as the first CEO, we had a second CEO who then had to move to London for family reasons. And then we brought in a third CEO from the outside who was amazing. We had certainly a bunch of turnover on the team because it was a new culture she wanted to instill that we were very supportive of, but she did an amazing job and helped us scale through exit. But that's a situation where we brought somebody in from the outside. And I could think of other instances like at Troops where we promoted from within. I can think about people that we moved from an SDR or BDR role to a bit of a sales role, and certainly an incredibly important enterprise account manager. And that person crushed it. Like they were able to, this is early in his career, and just manage our biggest accounts by far with incredible ease and sophistication, that of like someone that's been doing this for 20 years. So again, it all depends on the people and situation.
And so then, so given it all depends, and there are maybe clear heuristics, is it just once again going back to like building the right interviewing structures, the right job descriptions? And then I want to talk a little bit about culture and kind of truth-telling organizations as well. Is that what it's about though? If given it's all context dependent, is it, I just need to make sure I'm really good at hiring and recruiting or promoting or building that internal culture to help get those people involved?
Yeah. So assuming you've picked a sufficiently good and large enough market, and assuming that you're hovering over a decently good enough product idea, yeah, it all comes back to the people, no question. And again, like those people, if you have a sufficiently bad product idea or you're tracking towards a sufficiently bad market with great people, you can course correct. I have another founder friend, started a company, scaled it to about 25 million in ARR, and for maybe a year or two was just flat, and he could not break through that ceiling. And then I caught up with him maybe a year or two after that, caught up and like, how are things going? And he said, things are great. We're growing, I don't know, 30-40% a year, and they're tracking really well. And I asked him, well, what changed? And he said he just hired a better executive team. And surprise, surprise, like same product, same business, swapped out the people, making those judgments and key decisions. And as a result, the business started to grow pretty quickly again. So again, I think it really just does ultimately come back to the people.
So how do you inculcate, to help build those people, how do you inculcate the sort of truth-telling mindset in an organization? What are the process systems you set up that enable that? And is it, I assume part of it's just coming from day one almost, and how you're trying to do things as a business for every person you bring on board, and then they keep repeating that mantra thereafter. But how do you inculcate that mindset?
Yeah, that all does start at the top. There's not one size fits all either. So there are people who have a very hands-on micromanagement approach and are incredibly successful. I would characterize maybe once upon a time, like Mark Zuckerberg is that type of person, or maybe Elon Musk is maybe a better example. And then there are other people that are uh, much more giving with autonomy and create more of a bottoms up culture. That's kind of been more my style. And they both have pros and cons, but and can both work. I think the key is whatever approach and culture is right for you and your founding team, that's just one you should align on and embody with your immediate team and your immediate hires. And then I think what you'll find is they will do the same. So it starts at the top for all these companies. It's the tone and tenure that you set at the top that permeates throughout the organization.
Is there a tone and tenure that you think has a higher chance at excellence and success? And so you brought up Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and things like that, right? So some of these people they're some of the most successful companies in the world. And of course, you could throw Apple in there and Steve Jobs. They sort of have famously mercurial, I can't even say it, right? But like personalities to some extent. Now, is that what made these companies successful, or is that just what gets them in the news more often and we know more about them? And then you have a ton of these companies that are under the radar, but massively successful with founders who have a completely different personality type.
Yeah, I think certainly the companies you just talked about, whether it be like Elon and Tesla or Facebook, you're certainly going to hear about those companies because they are among the most successful and they are personalities. But like take Google for example, when the founders aren't really there anymore, and they were, I guess they were in the limelight, but the company is still arguably one of, if not the most successful companies ever. That's just a cash flowing machine. And it's not really a founder story. It's a culmination of all of the things they've done at the company, which is a result of probably the amazing hires that they've made over the years and certainly a little bit of luck. So again, like I think both can work. And I'm not sure that maybe there is evidence that one approach is better than the other. If there is, I'm not sure, but I do think and know both can work.
Interesting. And are there then, like, for you though, it sounds like it's a little bit more bottoms up. I want to give people autonomy. That is what tends to work more in how you build things.
Yeah, that's worked for me so far. And so, again, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Again, for me, I constantly look for people that are better than me and complementary and kind of get out of their way and empower them however I can. But that's just my approach, and it's worked for me. Again, it's different for everybody.
So walk me through, speaking last sort of question I think about culture, we'll probably ask is compensation, titles, things like that. How do you think through that with people? I know one of the success things you and I talked about previously was how at Tula, 50 people or more became millionaires because of that. And that seems like a huge success in my mind and one thing that I would like to emulate. How do you think through that for people on your team, the companies you're building, being generous but not being crazy, because you also have to build a business, right? You can't give away all your cash to the team and not then have a profitable, real growing business and have money to reinvest. So how do you balance those elements?
So I would rather have a small percentage of something big than a very large percentage of nothing or something really small. And so back to the journey is the prize and working with amazing people. If I'm going to war every day with people, I want them to feel very aligned with me. And the way I think about doing that is by making them your partner and co-owner of the company. And the way I think about doing that is by giving people equity in the business. So for me, it's important that people have equity in the companies, at least that I'm building, because if I win, we all win, and we should all feel that reward. So over the years, I can think of many situations where I feel like I've been overly generous to a fault. For sure, there are people out there that would probably disagree with me, but that just goes to the territory. But again, I think like if you create the right incentives and you get people committed and emotionally bought in, then amazing things can happen. And again, if we do amazing work, it's important to me that people feel that success and share in that upside.
Yeah. And are there other things that help build people's loyalty, energy, excitement beyond compensation? Because compensation to me is just one part of one element among many that gets people excited and want to join a company. are there other key things you try to explain to people when you're hiring them, or talk about a ton internally?
Yeah, for sure. So I think kind of the theme you're getting at here is if you hire people better than you and get out of their way or help them and they're successful, and the people that they hire, et cetera, do the same, they're successful, then ultimately you will be successful. So selfishly, it's a win-win. It's in my interest to selfishly make sure that those individuals on my team are wildly successful. Why? Because then they, as an individual, personally will do very well in their career and at the company. But as a result, then I, as a founder, co-founder of the company, should also do well. And so I think that's a perfectly healthy situation to call out and acknowledge. And that's what building a great company is about. So, again, for me, like if I can make people on my team wildly successful, both at my company and for the long term, I believe their interests will be aligned with mine. That they in turn will want to make the company successful because it ultimately helps their career in the long term.
Do people, I mean, in a sense, you're saying there's like a selfish element to their decisions, which makes sense, right? We all should have some level of selfish self-interest, which is sort of the point. Largely, I think that's actually a beautiful part of the sort of capitalist system, that our self-interests help us push us in the directions we care about and what we want to get done. So what is the alignment, or is there a breakdown between where it's like, hey, equity versus cash versus career growth and opportunity? Are there certain heuristics you look for on that front? And I say that partially because the more I've done startups, and we work with a lot of startups, of course, at my company, the more I think that people don't actually fully understand equity and the value of equity and how that works. Despite, yes, I think equity is how you make a life-changing amount of money. You're never going to change your life dramatically by just getting salary. Yet people don't fully understand that. How do you break those pieces apart to help people understand what the biggest drivers are for them when you bring them on board and get them hopefully committed to your business?
We do the math for them. So at every offer letter at Troops, when we issued equity, I think maybe not every, but certainly most offer letters, we would present people with three options. It would be they all have cash and equity, but they would have this inverse relationship. So like high in cash, lower on equity, some middle scenario, and then the inverse. And we'd let them pick. And we were always hoping that they would pick for the option that had the most equity, because that would tell us that they were really in
Yeah.
for the upside and want real ownership. And that's what they were playing for. So we love that. And people that didn't select that option, it's not that we wouldn't hire them, but we were just mindful of it.
Did
And then
you
we
see
would
any correlation between that? Like, did people turn over faster if they weren't in that select that option? Was there actually a correlation at all, or not really?
it's a good question. I maybe one day I'll do the exercise, but I could think of counterexamples where some folks that picked the most cash also happen to be incredible. And they might have picked the most cash due to life circumstances.
Yep.
Maybe they have a house, a mortgage, and kids, and they just had a number that they needed to cover. So I've seen it both ways, but I don't know overall. And then in terms of how we help people understand the equity, as I mentioned, we would do the math. We would literally say and show them, here is how much equity you're being offered. Here's how much it's worth. Here's how it would be valued at these hypothetical exit value scenarios, enterprise value scenarios. Here's what that would mean for you after you exercise your strike price and your option. Here's what it might look like after you think about taxes. And so we'd literally do the work for them. And then we'd also caveat that all with, oh, and by the way, this is a giant lottery ticket. Like the probability of this going to zero is much, much, much higher than any of the fictitious numbers that I just outlined for you. But also, by the way, we've done this before. We've had some success. So on a relative basis, there's a high probability that we'll be successful relative to people that haven't done it before. So it's a little bit of cognitive dissonance. We're simultaneously telling people this will likely be worth nothing, but this relative to other people may likely be worth a lot of money.
Well, and also it's better than just a lottery ticket, right? You said lottery, which is a good way of putting it, and it's true, I think, for startups, but it's also way better than a lottery ticket, because you're literally You're downside protected because you're actually getting salary. Now, maybe you're giving up 5, 10, $15,000 or whatever, let's call it like 5, 10, 15% in salary by going to work for another company, which you could have done and not gotten any equity. But you're rolling that into this lottery ticket that actually has a decent chance of like versus the one in hundreds of millions for an actual lottery ticket. There's a 10% chance that maybe this lottery ticket will actually turn out, which is way better odds than the actual lotto.
For sure. The other thing I've done in the past, and we were especially good at this at Troops, is during the interviewing process, we would try to get a sense of what people wanted to do short term and long term with their career. And by and large, what we heard is people ultimately wanted to start their own company one day. I would say the vast majority of people we hired did. And I would venture to guess that at many startups, especially in the earliest stages, many of those startup employees also, hopefully one day too, will want to start their company. And so we were very open about that and explicit. And so what we would do at the company is share literally everything with our team, except for what other people would make compensation wise. So we would have board meetings, and that week we would do a board replay. We would literally go through the entire board deck, slide by slide, what questions were asked, how did we think about things. We would show our revenue, we'd show our runway, like you name it. And what we were really doing is showing our whole team how we were running our company so that one day in the future, when they would build their own, they could learn and choose the things that they found valuable and throw away the things that we did that they thought maybe we did wrong. But that experience as well had a value to it that is much harder to put a number against. And so I think a lot of the reason also people would join, aside from the mission and opportunity and the compensation, is like that meta learning experience of what does it take to build a startup from scratch, and how will these guys and girls do it, knowing that they've done this before from zero to exit.
What percentage of those people do you think actually ended up creating a company? Like, I know a lot of people say they want to be a founder. What percentage of the people who said that at your company, since it was sort of a majority or felt like it, ended up actually doing it?
The percentage, so I don't know. The percentage is probably low, like as a quantum number, because there was a lot of people we hired. But I could count on two hands a lot of people that I've worked with that have gone on to do their own company. And I'm certain they would have not done their own company had it not been for the experience they had at my companies. And yeah, there's quite a few of them actually,
that's cool.
Incredible. Yeah.
Going back to your point about give different offer levels. So I was smiling a bit because we actually did that at my last company where we gave people those 3 options, exactly the same thing. I'm not doing it at Levy. The reason being is we found it ended up creating overly confusing for people. And then people would also end up forgetting what their choices were, a year ago when they would get promoted or something. And they'd be like, well, but now my numbers, because I chose the high cash option in low equity when I started, my new grant is still much lower than what other people are getting and stuff like that. And like, well, yeah, that's because you made a choice, and people would end up forgetting, and it created this extra level of angst and confusion for them. And so I'm wondering if that was the case for you, because that's why I decided not to, because it seemed like such a good idea. And it just turns out that people have short-term memories, even when it comes to their own compensation.
Yeah. So I mentioned we did that for most, but not all people. And the instances where we didn't do it was probably because of this reason, where we're like, given that person, we just knew that optionality might cause friction and doubt. So, and we also knew what they wanted, and they knew what they wanted, and they were very clear. And so in those moments, we just got right to the point. We're like, okay, we think we know what you want. Here it is. And in those instances, the majority of the time we got that candidate over the finish line and on our team.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's something maybe I'll think about for us to do again, because it is extra work, but it's also really good to do. And the point, by the way, about also walking through the board discussions and things like that is one that I think is important for founders to do. And the other reason, you didn't mention this, but at least what I took away from that is it was also a way for you to repeat the values of the company and what you're trying to do and accomplish. So yes, you're helping people understand more how to run a company, but it's also an opportunity to refresh them why you're excited, why you're worried, be transparent and give them that story about what they should be doing on a daily basis too. So it's extra work, but it has a lot of value.
For sure. I'm glad you brought that up because I should note our offer letters were not legal Word documents. They were PowerPoint presentations. They were beautifully designed presentations that talked about what our company is, what we're doing, our customers, our growth, our investors, the offer, what the offer is and is not, how to think about the offer, our culture, our values. If this thing does well, what that could mean more broadly in the ecosystem and in a historical context for the industry we're playing in. So for sure, it was like a full presentation and holistic conversation on why this role is such an incredible opportunity above and beyond just the comp.
I love that idea. I actually think it's pretty rare that people have done that. And I haven't done that in my company. I'm like, I'm going to go do this for Levy, where we're creating a much clearer either presentation. I might do a memo because I like doing the memo format for some things, but write a memo. Like, here are the key reasons why you should be super excited to be here and why we're excited to have you, what we're going for as a company, where we're growing to, and why this is relevant. And then also giving them some more context around the equity and the upside and what that really means and looks like, and try to do and make sure in a non-legal way, because you don't want to make promises you can't fulfill. But thinking through those elements is another really great one. What have you found when you think through all your 25 companies, going back to that point? I mean, like, what was the driving force? One thing I like to ask people a lot is sort of, what was the driving force to help you become an entrepreneur? And I ask this because to help people think through, like, why should they become an entrepreneur? And should they become an entrepreneur, right? It sounds like you started at a pretty young age. And I'm guessing, given your mom was working with you or working for you in a sense, you had some pretty supportive parents. But even still, why did you go down that path? Like, what was the driving factors? You didn't know when you were in high school that, like, that was a way to provide joy in your journey. Probably you weren't thinking through that part of it. So what were the driving factors that pushed you? Was it your dad, your mom, family historical stuff? Why was that even a path you considered?
Probably the biggest characteristic would be curiosity. I was just super interested to see if that crazy idea could become reality. That's probably the through line of it all. I remember thinking, like, take Tulip, for example. It was like, why couldn't I build a skincare company? All the pieces are here. I've never done it before, but let me go try. Or with Troops, why couldn't I try to change an entire industry in the way work gets done? Like, it's kind of crazy, but we can try. Like, let's go see if we can, and prove it to myself if I could or could not. Even in high school, this was an official company, more like a hustle, but I remember this thing called eBay came along, and I would buy bouncy balls wholesale and I would sell them at a huge markup to my friends and students at school, which ensued in absolute chaos because then bouncy balls would fly everywhere and then I would get suspended. But the point is, like, I did that because this thing called eBay popped up and I was just curious in how it worked. And so I came up with a use case and so on. So yeah, look, I would say curiosity for sure. The other thing is, you touched on my parents, but I grew up in a household that was middle class. I was really fortunate. My father worked his ass off and did well. He's a real estate developer. He started off his career sweeping houses, and sweeping houses became building houses, and he's been doing that his whole life. And his father, my grandparents, were Holocaust survivors that came here with nothing and didn't speak a single word of English, started their own farm, and from a small town in Toms River, New Jersey, would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, drive his eggs all the way 2 hours north to New York City. He'd sell them, drive home 2 hours, and rinse and repeat 7 days a week. And he just did that out of necessity. So I would say the curiosity coupled with the exposure to just, like, go work hard made for the ingredients of entrepreneurship. The other thing I'll add is the power of perspective came into play at an early age. So I've been doing this thing called ski patrol for over 20 years. I started when I was a 15-year-old. What is ski patrol? It's kind of like an EMT or paramedic on skis. And so I would go to work as a ski patroller and get up in the morning, you'd open the mountain and see all these people show up. They go skiing and they go have lunch and then maybe they ski a little bit after. Maybe the plan is to do après ski shortly thereafter. And some of those people just don't make it through the day. Right? They hit a tree and die, right? And like here you are, you see this up close. And that perspective coupled with what my grandparents lived through, the odds of them surviving are infinitesimally small. You see that and you internalize that. And the perspective of like, life is short, make the most of it, leaved me with no choice but to go and chase these wild things out of sheer curiosity because life is short. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I think those ingredients were instilled at a young age. And I was fortunate to stumble into that at a young age. And I just stuck with it even till today.
Is a takeaway too? I mean, what sort of comes to mind when you're saying this stuff? I'm like, hey, like you just have a level of confidence that a lot of people don't have. But I think that confidence from what you're describing it is actually just like you're not scared of failure because you know you'll figure something out always. And I think a lot of people don't start companies because they're so scared of that failure piece. Like, oh my God, I start a company, it fails. I won't have a job. I won't have money. I won't have all these other things. And I don't get the impression that that was a fear that you had. And maybe it was partially instilled by your parents knowing, hey, like, if my company fails, I always can go back and sleep in my childhood bedroom and I'll have a roof over my head and dinner, which is a level of comfort a lot of people even don't have there. But what are is it confidence? Is it just a lack of fear? Or is it just knowing that like hard work will pay off no matter what?
Yeah, I think you touched on it. I think it's fear or lack thereof. I think people overestimate fear and they underestimate their abilities. There's a blog post I wrote, and I was fortunate to have this experience on this topic. And the gist of it is I worked for a CEO who had a job doing door-to-door paper sales. This is years ago. Paper for like copy machines and printers. And he went to Tel Aviv for a week before he was going to get married. They would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner outside their whole trip. And I think somewhere along the way in the trip, they decided to have lunch inside. And so they're eating lunch in Jerusalem, I think in a falafel shop. And right outside, a suicide bomber blew himself up, killed a handful of people. He came home and pretty much immediately quit his job, and his wife quit her job. She started her own t-shirt company. He joined two brothers to help them launch their company. That company became a company called advertising.com, which sold to AOL for like $535 million. Second CEO I worked for at Buddy Media, vis-a-vis the acquisition of my company. He was in college and was working on a startup, but didn't move forward with it because I think maybe he was a little bit afraid. And then suddenly in college, he collapsed, was rushed to the emergency room. His blood pressure dropped severely, had open heart surgery suddenly, saved his life. And as soon as he recovered, he started the first of many successful companies that he sold, Buddy Media being one of them. There was another instance that I also referenced in this post, but I was in an Uber getting driven to somewhere. I think it was the ferry. I was heading to the city. And the Uber driver was telling me that he was doing sales for a big company in New York City, and his territory was Southern Manhattan. And on 9/11, he just so happened to be away from one of his customers, not the office where he needed to be at the Twin Towers. And he survived 9/11, but that whole day he thought, I should have been dead. And man, I can't wait to get home and see my kid, who was one and was just for the first time beginning to walk. And as soon as he got home, I think like the next day, he quit his job and became a pastor. And so he's part-time drives an Uber and full-time as a pastor. I share this because in all three of those instances, and through my own experiences, but not as directly, I think all of these things have the same thing in common, which is this. All of these people look death straight in the eyes and realize life is short and I can't be afraid to go for it because who the hell knows what can happen with the short time we have on life. So I might as well go for it, whatever that means. The first CEO, Andy is his name. He would refer to it as like playing on house money. Like we're all playing on house money. The fact that we're all here is in of itself a miracle when you think about the
Oh
odds of
yeah.
just being here.
Life.
But most people don't internalize that. And then they just go through life as a zombie or with these they're just stuck on a treadmill, just going through life kind of without kind of making decisions that they know they want to make, but they're too afraid to make. And so I think by having that perspective and looking fear head on, that, at least for me, has given me the perspective to just go for it. And for me, just has meant building companies because it's fun and interesting. And to your point, if it doesn't work, at least in the earliest days, because I was my 20s, yeah, I'd sleep at my parents' house.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't going homeless, fortunately, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Fear is the biggest factor.
What I would say too is I found a similar part, which is also the fear part. Good things will happen if you're willing to work hard in build a company. Even if the company fails, there's so many other things that come out of it. And I've seen that time and time again with my own career. Yes, I've had failures, but through those failures, so many other things have occurred, which enabled other types of success throughout, which I'm so glad I did it. If I hadn't, I would have maybe been on that basic sort of path that doesn't at least interest me and wouldn't have made me proud when I'm 70, 80, 90 years old. What about when, for all these folks you just referenced and yourself included, how do you decide when to step off of that entrepreneurial journey and sell your company? How do you decide when's the right time that, hey, like I'm really ready to get off, or at least I'm ready for that next new journey and I'm tired of this old one that I've been a part of? Because I think for a lot of founders, that can be a tough decision because you're giving up your baby and something that gave you purpose. How do you make that decision?
Yeah, there's so many factors that go into that. The most obvious ones are you choose to sell your company because you think you can make a lot of money selling it. You decide to sell your company because you think it's a failure and you want to get out. You decide to sell your company because you're tired and want to move on. The other thing I should note is the best companies are bought, not sold as well. So again, it really all depends. And I've lived through the situation where you decide to sell because the financial reward just makes sense to do so. And I've been in situations where the company sells out of necessity because the founder's tired and or there isn't a viable path forward as an independent company. So again, much like how companies are started are snowflakes and every single one is unique, same is true of buying or selling companies or the M&A process in general.
Yeah, no, it's so fair enough. And it's a different discussion for each person, but it's one of those things. I suppose you should feel really lucky if and when you get to that place in your career where you have the option to make a decision about whether to sell. And then you decide if it makes sense for you and then go either do it again or become an investor or do a million different paths that people like to take.
Yeah.
So kind of my last two questions that I'd like to ask, and we're getting close on time anyways, but is if you could travel back in time to your earliest companies that you were starting, is there any advice you would have given yourself then or things you would have done differently with those companies? And that will tie in then to the next question that I always like to ask to end things, which is what is a single piece of advice that you would give to every founder? If you could say, hey, there's one thing you should focus on, what is that one thing? Now, in your case, they might be the same, but it might be different too. What advice you'd give your younger self versus the advice you'd give every entrepreneur?
Yeah. So what would I have done differently? Like, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently because I am where I am and I like where I am. And not for all of the decisions I made, I would be somewhere different. Impossible to know if better or worse, but I don't know what I would have really done differently in hindsight. Advice, though, I would maybe given to my younger self would have been think bigger. So I remember in particular in college, I started two companies with a friend. One was basically an events and marketing firm. Started off as we threw a party and then evolved into we would throw many parties and events with local and national sponsors and advertisers, which we then kind of franchised to other college campuses. And then we launched another company called thecampusatlas.com. It was, or the idea was, a portal by which students could find everything they need in one place. So professor ratings, local drink specials, the weather, all of the email links for email and appropriate resources. And we rolled that out to about 6 or 7 college campuses. I say think bigger because in those two instances, they were both specific to a college kid. And the reality is there was a much bigger world out there. And And I felt like we were looking for a local maxima rather than like a global maxima, because as I mentioned earlier, it takes just as much work to start a successful company in a small market as it does a big company in a big market. So yeah, I wish we just, yeah, I wish I had thought bigger. Instead of selling bouncy balls wholesale on eBay, maybe I would have been selling, I don't know, cars or something, or
Yep.
houses, or companies. But what did I know? Like, again, I was young.
Yeah, totally. So is that similar advice then you would give to, if you would give one single piece of advice to entrepreneurs today, would it be think bigger, go bigger than you imagine? Because there are lots of founders I talk to who are like building a small little niche product. Now maybe that's a good place to start and that's a nice wedge. Is that the advice, or is it something more than that around culture or no fear, or how would you describe your single piece of advice to take away?
So many, but yeah, I mean, just to reiterate a few we touched on, because there isn't one, but yeah, fear for sure. Like, you can't be afraid. If you're building a company or a founder of a company, you've already taken that step. So clearly you've cleared that hurdle. But on the topic of go bigger, I think that is appropriate. And I think one of the mistakes founders make is when they're building their company and they're looking to improve and grow, and I've been guilty of this, most founders think linearly or incrementally. They think if we do this next thing, we'll be a little bit better. I think the better approach is to think in like orders of magnitudes better of swings and bets, not a 1 or 2x improvement, but like a 10x improvement. That that thought exercise will, I think, unlock more growth for you as a founder, because it forces you to think bigger and, again, not incrementally. And there might be a much bigger lever you can pull out at your company staring at you or hiding in plain sight. But if you're just thinking about incrementality, I don't think you're going to be as excited about the business that you could build versus if you were to think about what are the biggest levers you could possibly pull on at a company. So that was advice given to me, and I think it was advice that was really great.
Yeah, no, that's great. So Dan, how can people find you if they want to get in touch? They want to learn more about what you're building today, how to build, ask you questions, get an investment from you. We didn't talk about investing at all, but I know you do some investing. How can folks get in touch?
Social media, I'm Dan Reich on Twitter, on Instagram, probably the easiest places.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Dan, thank you so much for the time. I sincerely appreciate it. I know I took a bunch of notes on things that I want to go implement right now. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.